Welcome back. So last week was a great week, and we had a really good start with everyone, some interesting topics that were broached, and some great citations. This week we're going to start talking a little bit more about the business side of the IT and project management. Particularly, I want to discuss Bullman and Deal's four levels of a business organization and the system approach, and how important it is to have stakeholders and CIOs on board with every single project and step. You can read in your books in a lot of the technical terms. When we look at project management, the biggest concern is always meeting the user's needs or client's demands, getting to that end point. The systems philosophy a lot of people think about, and they'll use that word philosophy as thinking, in my terms, thinking with the end in mind, positively thinking to make sure everything flows in all aspects of the project that are integrated are connecting for their milestones and hitting that mark. The systems analysis is always kind of the interlinking parts to how do we solve those problems to make sure each piece flows correctly throughout that whole progress and hits each milestone. I like using the term milestone because it's better than goal or benchmarks a lot of people use. But I found the milestones always is rewarding, and all my teams have always had a milestone party or get together, drink after work. System management, of course, is more so dealing with the business end. And you're dealing with the organizational issues and how you have to change things to make HR happy, to make all your people happy, and make sure everybody's on track. There's kind of a three-spear model for looking at systems management, and it's really business first. What's it going to cost? If you're looking at the model you saw in your book here, I integrated it in to the idea of bringing in a project into a college or university, an IT project, adding laptops, adding software. You're looking at what the cost is to the students. Is it important? Has it value? Is there going to be an onset cost back to the college or your team, your organization? The technology parts are usually the things we're building, we're putting together with our hardware or software and interlinking all these pieces. And the organization is how you deal with it. The flow, the management of the people and the jobs, and the placement of each apparatus inside of the whole project that you're managing. One of the hardest things to always deal with in the organization is interpersonal communication in between each person of the team. Because many people have different failures or shortcomings, or they may have, I call them itches, to where they can only work from 3 to 4 on code, or they have to have a room that's quiet. So you have to be kind of conscious on the organizational side that you're meeting demands of people and getting things done that are interesting. If you look at some of the most innovative companies out there today, especially some of the ones on the internet that are doing sales and marketing and building everything, you look at Zappos, for instance, you can see some really interesting characteristics of how they changed their business model and working model. So everybody working for the organization, there's over 500 in the Las Vegas area where it's based out of. They have a no-holds-barred kind of policy for making sure everybody is comfortable. If you want to come in with your dog, you can. If you want to come in a clown suit, you can. If you want to, in the middle of the day, 3 or 4 people, if you stop, go have a volleyball game, you're welcome to. So there's a lot of different techniques and organizations and managers will do to help implement sufficient happiness. Bullman and Deal first created the idea of the structural frames of organizations, and there's 4. The first one usually is a structural frame, and that's the one we're most organized into. It looks at roles, and if we think of IT, then maybe one person is dealing with uploading software. Maybe another person deals with the integration of hardware or lines. Putting in cats, there's all kinds of different aspects. One person might just be in charge of tracking each milestone to make sure everybody's on task, communicating out the needs, number one, to the CIO or the chief stakeholder, the person who's sponsoring the project. The human resources frame is kind of the frame that's taken over in America today, to where it focuses on actually a human resources department giving you your job, giving you the frame, the contract that you have to carry out, the work and the time and the scope. and they make sure all the needs of the people are handled, whether it's psychological, physical, health insurance. The political frame is one that's very combative, to where you have multiple leaders and they're all competing in most cases to get their aspect of the project done, so that the all and mighty project done aspect is therefore convoluted a lot of times because it becomes a race. There's a lot of key power people that are conflicting each other's in their know-how and want to orchestrate everybody into silos. And if you don't know what a silo is, in a lot of cases it becomes a competitive nature, and they've always used the idea of the old barn silo to where it becomes vertical in the way things are run, top down, and nobody talks, and everybody's separated between each 4 units, 5 units, 10 units, however many are working together on one project to get that piece integrated. The symbolic frame is more of a cultural important or influential frame. A lot of times we think of religious leaders or President, United States, you could think of would be a symbolic leader, and we look for guidance from that person. I worked for a wonderful symbolic frame leader before. Very passionate man, dressed to the nines, and was able to sway everybody's influence to get the job done, hit milestones, because he's very influential. A lot of times when we look at things, what went wrong is always the term your book uses, and past vice president I had always asked what went wrong on prior models that we would look at. And you can read over this one, but one of the great pieces we did was some of the Olympic pieces that we were putting together. And when one sort of failed, we used that as a model to understand what went wrong. And we looked back and tracked each and every individual's milestones. And we found out the key aspect of what went wrong was that we were not communicating effectively to our third-party vendors who were actually putting together the final product for us. We had 5 different stages of people communicating in our in-house, but we never really communicated effectively to the third-party vendor. We thought that our team leader was to do this, and the team leader thought that the vice president was to do this, and it ended up being slipped through the cracks. So simple communication could end up destroying something. So you always want to look at what went wrong with projects. Inside that organizational structure, there's kind of 3 basic elements. The functional or the management structures, I like to say, is the functional managers. They're the ones who directly report to the CIO, the stakeholder, the sponsor of the project. It's their job to collect all the data, all the milestones, and where we are, and keep a continuous report going. And then there's project program managers. They do kind of the same job, but there's usually multiple of them that interlink and work together to make one report. Instead of one functional person doing everything, there may be 5 key leaders. I do this a lot in the capstone projects here, where I asked to have 2 or 3 key leaders or program managers to report right into me. I have the students file report. So this is maybe something you'll want to do for your final reports, is to have someone doing this, or 2 or 3 people make key reports to me. And the matrix is kind of all those middle managers. We've all been there, reported to them, become one ourselves in a lot of cases right now. And they try to all facilitate, I call it like chickens with their heads cut off, scrambled. They all know their deadline, but they all really don't have a chance to communicate because they're so busy working with their employees to make sure their function and milestones are hit. And progress reports are kind of hodgepodge, not really put into one, but multiple aspects coming together, and CEOs have to break this down for their own knowledge. So it's usually not the best functional aspect for an organizational structure. You can kind of see a nice flow chart of these. And if you look at the functional aspect, it's very clean and simple. So is project. When you get down to the matrix, it gets very confusing. You start seeing all different lines leading, who's doing what coming up. But the CIO has to kind of bring all this together. Versus here we have a centered and one person managing everything. A lot less convoluted. This was in your book as well, but I copied this back out. It's kind of nice to see how you look at each piece to what they really do and the mindset of how much they're actually percentage-wise working on that project itself. Organizational culture. This is an interesting piece, and it deals a lot with the culture, the values of an organization, but extends out into the communities. There's a really good book that I read and I use a lot in my undergraduate courses called Tribal Organizations or Tribal Culture. And it works with the actual tribal leadership of an institution to where you have everyone becoming a we culture at the end through 5 different various stages. The first is trying to get everybody on board. And if you look around the room, you know the person that is the one who says that everything stinks. My cup stinks, my computer stinks, my house stinks, my car drive in here stinks. And you get people on a team that have to work with these individuals, and you have to elevate them. And you usually get them to elevate to a second phase where they say, well, our team kind of stinks. I wish I wasn't on this team. I wish I was on that team. They're better. Eventually, those negative Nancy's, as a lot of people try to call them in a culture, become into an us, to where they start adapting and saying, I got to get on this train, or they get cut. They're out. They have to learn the social norms of how they can't act in this manner, that they have to have proper attire. They have to have value. If you look at the Japanese culture, and Onaka has expressly looked at this for years, to where great teams have such great value that they become personal and social with each other at all times. Onaka talked about an interesting piece to where the first bread maker was being produced. They could never get good bread. So at Nokia, the CEO said, I want every one of my engineers to go and make bread at the most famous hotel in Japan and learn how to knead and turn and make the dough and feel the dough. Then come back and find out what makes such great bread and incorporate this into it. And when they did that, they became a unit. Their behaviors changed. They all shared something. They had values. And they found that the great chefs making bread actually twisted the bread instead of smushing it and making it into a ball, but they twisted, which caused air bubbles to happen into the bread. And when it did this, it allowed more air in, butter to come in, and open up the pores and really make rich bread. They incorporated that back in their designs because they were so excited into a twisting bread making system, which then became a hit and sold millions of units of bread makers around the world. That's culture, to where great leaders will look and give people an idea and bring them all together and let them learn and grow and gain knowledge and create a value system to where they wanted to own something great. They wanted to make bread as great as those bread makers. There's 10 characteristics of an organizational culture. Identity is always one of the biggest ones to capture. Group emphasis, once everybody's on board, is pretty easy. Focus is easy, so is integration. One of the hardest things is always that risk tolerance. Dealing with that negative Nancy. Understanding how to work with people and their problems and situations. Conflict is usually one of the hardest things, and that's where a lot of times and why businesses have went to a human resource style of structure. It gives managers a place to take individuals who are causing conflict in between each other or manager to employee and have resolution with a third-party person right inside the organization before it gets to an end with no means. So this is kind of one of the hardest things to deal with, especially if you're in one of the other frames like a political frame. But in most cases there, the political person almost acts as a dictator and will fire the individual outright, which I've seen many of times. But no matter what, there always has to be an end in mind. Dr. Stephen Covey talks about that, thinking with the end in mind for everything that you do or every project, and making sure everything is a win-win situation for you and everyone around you. Stakeholder management sometimes gets to be a little more difficult, because you're dealing with the culture and the ideas and philosophy of your stakeholder, which may conflict with the relationships and convoluted ideas that you have that they don't have, or their convoluted ideas may conflict with the ones that you have are very concrete and laid out. If you're working in a union shop, there's very, very strict rules on what your position is allowed to do. A stakeholder might not care about that. It may end up causing conflict inside of your own community. So these are things you have to think about if you're working from a stakeholder management position, to where you always want to have a key liaison that works and communicates directly with the stakeholder, so you don't have communication problems and larger issues. Back in September 11th, we obviously saw some terrible things happen. And one of the things that's most neglected is they talk about the World Trade Center being rebuilt and all the problems that happened in that project management, which no way would I want to ever tackle anything like that or have known anyone who has done anything that big. But the logistics of just how each individual aspect was brought together for public safety, I think is an interesting project management concern. If you think about how the police, the fire, all work separately, from the city itself, who has to orchestrate traffic flow, water, sewage, to make sure everything's coming together so that the project, before it even starts, can be viable, can happen. These are all intricate pieces that people don't think about a lot of times in project management, to where there's many stakeholders that come together, especially in a massive project like this, before they can even start logistically building the project itself, the building itself. This is where top management comes in. A lot of times people call them the champions. I'm not really a fan of that term. The book uses that term, but more important, these are the CIOs. They're the ones who have to support every single project manager and the decisions they make. They have to be committed to the whole project and design and not have a mindset of stopping it halfway through. Top management can always help them. One, you can always make sure resources are available. And inside of resources, I mean not only the personnel, the technology, but also the support for stress reduction and helping on little matters, stepping in to be a leader, to be a person who is a mentor to junior managers and junior employees, and sometimes to just use some encouragement, reaching the milestones. There's other aspects with inside that these managers can really help. They call it mentoring and coaching, but it becomes more than that to me. Many of the places where I worked on projects that came out the best was where the mentors didn't just mentor. They made everybody a mentor, so everybody learned off of each other. Your weakness was supposed to be learned from the guy next to you who was stronger at that. And we did SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we give those chartings to each other constantly, so we can see who we can help because we are strong in one area and they are weak in another. That creates an opportunity for the whole team and eliminates a threat. This is what great leadership and coaching is, I think, is coming down to a baseline of getting everybody on board of becoming a mentor or coach themselves. IT governance is this kind of policy area to where it's sort of a cloud-like based. It's very direct in use in project management, its ideas, but the philosophies and guidelines have to come in very clear for each and every person. A lack of the governance is very counterproductive. If you don't stipulate that everybody has to be at work from 9 to 5, that can have a problem. Because if every key person is not reaching their milestones on your timeline, it causes conflicts for someone else's. If everybody's supposed to be using the same language or same code, and someone else wants to try to interject something else or his own ideas or philosophy, you have to have policies in place to make sure everybody's on the same page. And that way, conflict is reduced and allows people to flow honestly and work together seamlessly. A lot of chief information officers have problems, and I say this because they are under the business model, and they will start projects and see the bottom line coming up, and they may stop projects, which frustrates the individuals on the team working. A lot of times it's, again, a place for a champion or that mentor or the liaison between the management and the CIO to work together to try to break down barriers and keep a positive attitude towards the project and look at the success values, the key milestones that are happening, and make sure everyone's on a favorable track. A lot of times, senior management can do a couple things that are real simple and easy. One is be a hero for the project. Help guide the guidelines, writing the project plans, help improve the status of information flow, create a communications flow itself so every single team manager knows who's going to get the information and at what time. Set up strategic points for meetings. This reduces stress and brings on excellence inside the project itself. A project lifecycle is a collection of multiple projects that come together in different phases and aspects or stages and comes out with the final outcome being the user's goal in mind or the stakeholder's needs, the product itself. It's a deliverable is one of the business terms that's used a lot. It's what are you actually going to produce at the end of each phase or each job, or what section is going to produce what that comes together. The deliverable is the product or service produced and provided as part of a project. And there can be many of deliverables inside each project, and each team could have many different deliverables, and each one set at a different milestone. Early in the phases, you have to think about the resources and the level of uncertainty. A lot of people call that risk, but I think the uncertainty is, will we have everything on time? Will we have the ability to handle the scope, the size of the project? These are the uncertainties a lot of time that come to mind in my early onsets of looking at a project life cycle. Then it becomes the idea of how you keep improving it, the continuous improvement idea. The final phases always look at how you can improve the next series, or if the sponsor is going to approve the final aspect. It's interesting because if you look at this chart, it's missing something. Take a second and look. Did you find it? In my frame, in my mind, this is the book's idea and a few others, and you'll see many models out there like this. Yes, we have the concept. Before that, we should even have a charter. We should have a whole idea of what this concept's for and a charter of roles and aspects. There's also other areas where it's lacking. You have development, right? And implementation? No, I've never worked on a team that hasn't done user task analysis, brought in the stakeholders and users right here and looked at the prototype and during the development and seen what they need to replace, redo, go back and start over. Way before anything's implemented. And the closeout always has lessons learned. And they brought this up in there, but I think it's not really highlighted enough in importance, because your next project can always learn from the previous mistakes and what was the weakness. But here again, remember the first part is defining a charter. Everybody accepting a charter, saying what your rules are, what the scope of the project is, who's going to be the manager, who's going to communicate to CIO, what structure are we using in the management philosophy, how are we going to get things done, who's going to create the timeline. These are all such paramount pieces that's missed in this project lifecycle model they're showing us. So the developments in this lifecycle is really the key parts to me, making sure they're all there. A predictive life cycle, they say, you can look at and clearly articulate, predict what the scope is, the schedule, the time frame, how much it's going to cost. The adaptive, which I don't really like the adaptive idea, I like the term agile software development a little more, because it flows with as each person or team project manager works to intertwine these pieces. It's more agile, allowing you to have flexibility in the time and in the schedule for each little intricate part coming together. They are time-based in most areas, but they're a little more fluid and giving you flexibility on the builds. Predictive uses a waterfall method. A lot of times you'll see, I labeled a bunch here, waterfall method, it kind of has a clear defined stages. The spiral is almost, I think of a tornado. It kind of picks up momentum and it grabs as people get pieces together, more and more come together in kind of a linear approach, and you're building them up. The incremental is kind of the same system, but it's if you think visually, more of a block building process that interlinks instead of less of an agile flow, being able to fit in as parts come together. Rapid application is a big term right now. It's they say sacrificing quality. A lot of times it depends on the ability of the teams. If you look at MITRE Corporation, I always draw back to MITRE. I'm fascinated with that systems they have. They have the highest of high producers that they buy and steal from other companies. And they put these people on an agile system to where they will be pulled from right in the middle of a project and stuck on another project if they know their expertise in such area is stronger than someone else's, or there's a sticking point in a project. And that rapid application development model that they use is kind of interjects people in, interjects people out for key roles. As I was saying earlier, I'm more of a fan of the idea of agile software development, to where you can interject to get the final piece done. And if one segment's done, you can move team members over onto another section to help them with the build, so you're not stuck with one role, and when Bob's done with this one and Scott's done with this one, they're done with the project. I like to see it more agile, that they can jump back and forth. MITRE does this really well. One of the big things is that exit. They call it the kill points. I'm not too big of a fan of the terminology here. I like to look at it as exit strategies, or communicating the final points to your stakeholder. And look backs is another idea. These are surveys of each individual member of the team. Ask them how they did their job. What problems did they have? How can they negotiate out better models in the future for themselves and for others? If they had a problem or conflict, how did they get over it or work it out? These are exit pieces, or the kill points, that really should be looked at deeply with managers to help on the next model and next build. Yeah, the went right is always a really interesting thing, because you're sharing all this with other team managers. You're building better models. You're taking those pieces that are great and applying it onto the next one. A lot of great people have said a lot of great things, like "Know When to Stop Beating a Dead Horse" by Thomas Edison. He's able to clearly look at failure, because he failed at so many projects that he started, but it was okay. He took every little piece and put it into the next one and build his own abilities off of all these actions. Context for IT projects comes kind of in the term of size, complexity, the products that are going to be created or produced. You have to think about how diverse your team is going to be, what skill sets are needed to handle each one when we look at a context. And you guys will think about this when you look at your final project. What's inside of this scope? What would you actually have to do? Who would you have to hire to implement each little part? Who's going to cost more? Who's going to cost less to meet that budget? How much time and technology needs to be invested inside of this? How many specialized people do we need? Do we need to buy a third-party vendor to be able to handle something, because they may be more effective and cost-effective? Recent trends, again, as I just said, is outsourcing. A lot of people are using third-party vendors because of cost and time reduction, to where third-party vendors may be just working on one element and they can do it a lot faster than your team could do, because they're working on multiple elements at one time. We always hear this offshoring, to where organizations will ship work out of, especially America, because of labor costs and unions. It's kind of a double-edged sword because you take away jobs from America or whatever country you may be in, but it also provides a way for a company to be vital in the market space. Virtual teams are now today almost impossible not to do. Look at us. We're a virtual team working together at one goal: create your final project, get a master's degree, correct? We all work together, and you're going to have to do this as well, finding mechanisms to communicate this semester to create that final project for your piece on the project management. And each logistical part and meeting may have face-to-face virtual meetings through Skype or whatever method you come up with. If you look at IBM, they tackled that virtual idea years ago because they have people all over the world. And one of their number one issues they had to deal with this global aspect was communication. How do you talk to someone in Japan if you're in Kansas? You have to work out conflict times and resolutions. Do you do podcasts of each person to hear and back? Do you create MP3s or MP4 visuals for all your team members to view and see at any time, like I'm doing right now for you guys, and upload it to one data spot? You also have to have common practices inside of this. One common language, and a lot of times, is something that you have to logistically work out to make sure everybody understands English or Spanish or whatever communication tool and language you're using. And everybody has to have the right tools, the software, the inner workings to make sure communication is available. A lot of different technologies at IBM are set up just for this case. They work a lot of times now less on hardware construction, but more on software development for strategic communications and abilities. Outsourcing is very competitive. Many sprout, I will call them, companies are out there today just because of the availability to pick up on larger projects, especially government projects, because of this competitive advantage. Everybody's trying to sell their own worth and value. The main stakeholders look for this competitive advantage because it brings down their bottom line and they're able to put their product out on the shelf to clients a lot cheaper. Again, one of the ways is that outsourcing, creating different enterprise architectures to ensure that business model is met, that you're integrating all your pieces together and functionally as fast as you can. Time in a lot of parts of projects is the biggest essence, because if you're selling a product to a client who has to have it by a deadline to meet their goals, time can be a reason alone just to have outsourcing. Virtual teams do have some advantages. They don't usually get the relationships built that each team will do if they're hands-on and together, but they have this 24/7 kind of model to where I can work at any time at any place. Take, for instance, me as a university professor. A lot of days I just can't work at 8 o'clock in the morning. I can't get up, I can't do that. I need to sit on my porch, read my book, drink some coffee, maybe walk my dog, and come back in and then work on a lecture and build a piece. Or like today, come into the office because I need a space that's quiet and outside of the realm of my family bothering me. I can work from home, the office, and a lot of times you guys will get instantaneous email returns because I work off of my phone, and I may be on my mountain bike off an FDR park or somewhere else. So virtual teams have great advantages. It provides a lot of business flexibility, and it also allows you to have a global scope. You can use team members anywhere at any time. When I worked for EDMC, we had a global workforce. We never knew where each other really was located, but we always had synchronized meeting times to where we were all online at the same time, and we could use IM, instant messaging, to communicate back and forth, and Skyping. We also would put everybody onto one big platform and use lectures to each other and talks and coaching about how to facilitate the needs of the organization. And we would do that synchronized as well. Some people had to get up earlier than others, but it was fascinating to see how that culture worked. There do have some big disadvantages. That isolation of team members is always the one that seems to be the most cumbersome to me, where someone's always left out there in cyberspace and not really having the connections they have with everybody else. And it may just be because of cultural differences, and you have them a lot in virtual teams because one person might not have the same religious aspects as you, or they have religious aspects that we have to look at just because of the time and place they are. Think of Ramadan. When I've worked with many people and friends overseas, I have to respect the fact that Ramadan happens. Or I've had some very good friends who are Hasidic Jews that they are not allowed to work on certain days, on Sundays. And we cannot talk, communicate, do anything. And we have to learn to respect that. And virtual teams have a hard time learning this aspect until it's actually placed down, and become a conflict negotiation point. So from this chapter summary and kind of our second lesson, we have the big thing I want you guys to take away from it is the structural aspects of the organizations, the 4 Bullman and Deal frames. And I strongly encourage you guys to pick up their book. You can get a cheap copy on Amazon, probably for pennies from all my former students, tossing them after a semester. But they go in depth about the different structural frames, and you can utilize them for your final report and help elaborate on what you're talking about in your citations and your project management piece you're doing. And they also talk a lot about conflict reduction. I also ask you guys to think about looking at leadership books. You may want to read, I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and you may want to incorporate some of this information into your charter when you write one, of what the roles will be and how conflict is done and what your goals are. And use the 7 Habits as a methodology for helping you build that idea. Or go into Tribal Leadership book, and that book is by a couple great authors. And it's Dave Logan and John King wrote it. Haley Fisher Wright was another author in that book, and I strongly suggest reading that. It's very interesting how they talk about how tribal leadership is in the 5 stages that they call it despairing hostility. Then comes the apathetic victim, the lone warrior, finally to where you reach this tribal pride where everybody on a team comes unified, starts saying we are great. And then even better, which Covey calls the empowerment or emphatically listening or helping others stage, where they come into, they call it the wonderment, where everybody is great because now they're empowering other teams and other managers. So this might be something you want to put in your aspects, a hint of your project management final projects to think about, looking at some of these resources as well. Well, gang, I'm going to stop now because I'm getting a little tired, and I'll be putting together another lecture and another piece and video and uploading it soon. I hope everybody has a good couple days. If you can, make sure you get out there, ride a bicycle, go for a walk, go to the park, do something for yourself for an hour every day, or at least today. Have a great day, everyone.